This Week in Radio Tech, episode 153, is brought to you by Axia Audio and the range of intuitive, powerful, and nearly indestructible Axia audio consoles. See what Axia and Livewire IP audio can do for your studio on the web at axiaaudio.com.
And now, our feature presentation.
Twert.
Compelling audio content always starts with a microphone. Let's make sure you're choosing the right mic and the right mic preamp and avoiding those microphone gotchas.
All right, calm down. He says that to everyone.
This calls for immediate discussion.
What's up, Doc?
All your days are belong to us.
From his palatial office of important business,
or in a choice hotel in a distant land,
this is Kirk Harnack.
Mike Phillips has pro tips and advice, along with Chris Tobin, Andrew Zarian, and me for this microphone how-to episode.
You're dialed in to This Week in Radio Tech.
Hey, welcome in. It's time for This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Where am I? I'm in a hotel room somewhere around the world. We'll discuss that in a few minutes. This is the show where we talk about radio technology, and usually that includes audio technology, how to get really good audio, how to get good sound. We don't talk about monster cables. We talk about just how to do audio right with pretty ordinary stuff and not make any bad mistakes doing it. That's the biggest thing that'll make your audio sound good is don't screw it up. We also talk about RF technology, sometimes transmitters, receivers, satellite technology, and sometimes we get into the habit of listening to the radio and how things are changing. Maybe you're going to iPods and podcasting or listening to other streaming media, and what part radio and radio engineers play in that. I think we'll always need radio engineers, audio engineers to keep things going. And to, no matter what the transmission medium becomes. So that's what the show's about. This is our 153rd episode. On the show, our co-host with me this evening is Chris Tobin from New York City. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hello, Kirk. Yes, I'm in New York City, and tonight I'm actually broadcasting to the network from 1010 Winds Radio, CBS facility here in Lower Manhattan.
Cool. That's a good-looking studio.
Yeah. So, I forgot to say you're the best dressed engineer in radio, and once again tonight you prove it. Well, I'm also here. We're hosting a SPE local chapter here at the CBS facility, so it's been a busy night. Yes,
gotcha. Hey, what was your company involved with a presentation?
No, it was a topic on IP, video and IP, but it was not our company, Musicam USA. It was actually a company called DSI RF. Showing off some new video over IP products. Cool. So I think we'll line up our stuff for later in the year. Very nice. We've got an SBE meeting coming up in a few days in Nashville. In fact, that's one of our little topics in topical news will be about what the Alabama broadcasters are doing as far as education opportunities for engineers. And it's pretty exciting. And a guy named Larry Wilkins from Birmingham is going to be up there. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. Hey, let's bring in our guest. We have a great guest. We've talked to this guy on the air and off the air a few times. It's Mike Phillips from North Carolina. Whereabouts in North Carolina are you, Mike?
I am in Cary, and that is a suburb of Raleigh, or maybe Raleigh's a suburb of Cary if it keeps growing, but it's the Raleigh area.
All right. And Mike, give us a little 3 or 4 sentence spiel about you. Former broadcaster, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in the radio business. Literally, I was 9 years old when my father built his own radio station in Laurinburg, North Carolina. He built it literally by hand. My mother and I drove the tractor to bury the ground radials for the AM antenna. Bob Jones was our engineer, our consulting engineer. Stu Epperson did all of the engineering work for those people who know a lot about the radio business. We were on the air from 1962 until we owned it from 1962, and it went on the air until 1984. When we sold it, it was time to move on and do other things. But it was a lot of fun. It was a big challenge because we had to learn how to do things on the cheap. Not a whole lot of money floating around all the time in small market radio. Not if you want to buy equipment and eat all on the same day. So we got rather creative, and the engineering was somewhat of a challenge, and I actually loved it. You get radio in your blood, and it's hard to get it out. So I've kind of had my radio excitement reinvigorated with the advent of internet broadcasting because now bandwidth is everywhere.
Sure. I feel the same way. I started in radio when I was I guess 14 or 15 years old, and even though I'm not on the air every day anymore, I love doing stuff like this, and I know how you feel. Radio gets in your blood. Probably you too, Chris Tobin. Were you on the air, Chris?
I actually had the opportunity a couple of times to do in college radio, yes, on the air, and a couple of commercial gigs. I did some part-time stuff, believe it or not. The program director thought it was entertaining to have the engineer participate with the others. So we had a good time. Well, I was always a fan of learning how the other half lived or worked, so that I can better design facilities and really, so to speak, kick ass in the marketplace and be a competitor and not follow the leader but be the leader. So the PD was like, okay, you want to learn how these guys do things and what the studio works and doesn't work? Sit behind the chair and here's an overnight slot. You can do an hour. Okay, great. I had a ball. And I learned a lot about the design of the facility and realized, yeah, these guys are right. This setup really stinks.
So many people, our contemporaries in the broadcast industry, have been in radio, even on the air. I was driving around here in Riga, Latvia, which is where I'm talking to you from this evening, or 3 a.m. for me, and I was chatting with Frank Foti, who's the CEO of the Telos Alliance, and he was telling me and also our office manager, the manager here in Riga, Maris, about when he was young, when Frank was young in broadcasting. I said, Frank, did you ever play any tricks on the air? Did you ever have a little shenanigans? He said, oh man, yeah. So one time the station I started at, I think it was WELW, east of Cleveland, and he said that he was asked to fill in for this polka show that was every evening or late afternoon, and the guy just couldn't make it in. He'd been doing the show for years and years and years, never missed a show, couldn't get in, and so asked Frank to host it. And so Frank actually had heard it so many times he had memorized the host's opening spiel, and so he said the opening spiel. And then he says, and now we're going to start things off with a little blast from the past here. This is The Who, Pete Townsend. And he played about 10 seconds of The Who. The phone started lighting up, took that off and put the polka music back on. Of course, the regular host called up and he was livid about that. So yeah, radio is in our blood, and we were talking to Mike Phillips, who agreed to be on the show tonight. By the way, last week, we promised that Mike Durow would be on. Mike Durow, famous for inventing the discriminant audio processor and famous for those Durow loudness meters. Well, I got an email from Kay Durow, his wife, and she said that Mike took ill earlier this week. He's got pneumonia, so we wish Mike well, and he agreed he'd be on the show as soon as he could. Sometime probably in the next couple of weeks or so, we'll have Mike Durow on. So that's why he's not on, but Mike Phillips agreed to fill in here, and we're going to have a conversation about good quality audio, especially vocal audio. So we'll pretty much spend the whole hour talking about vocal audio and how to make that sound good and what pitfalls to avoid. Our show, by the way, is brought to you by the company I work for. They graciously sponsored the show. It's the Telos Alliance, and specifically the Axia Audio Division. And we'll talk about the Element console, and we'll talk about a little bit during the commercial about the beginnings of Livewire and this audio over IP thing that is just amazing. That started here in Riga, Latvia. So, hey, I want to start things out. We usually start out with a couple of topical topics, and let's see here. Let me bring up a window here where I can see what I'm showing you. There we go. So here I am in Riga, Latvia. Most people say, "What? Where's Riga, Latvia? What is that?" Just to let you know, Riga, Latvia is a former Soviet bloc state. Back in the USSR, Latvia was one of the states in the USSR. It's over here next to the Baltic Sea in far northeastern Europe, and it's south of Finland. It's south of Estonia and just north of Lithuania. Well, Riga Riga was a little bit involved in World War II. They tried to fight off the Germans, and I think the Russians fought off the Germans, and then the Russians took over. And the Latvians weren't all too pleased about that. And then they regained their independence, I'm sorry, I forget, 18, 20 years ago, maybe 15, 18 years ago. So they're delighted about that. There's still a lot of remnants of Russian life here in Latvia. If you're my friend on Facebook, I posted some pictures today of some old Russian test equipment, and I should post those pictures on our on the show notes when we post that up this weekend, so you can see some of the test equipment that I ran across. There's what looks like kind of like a Simpson voltmeter, but in a little bigger case, like an HP voltmeter, and it has the Russian CCCP stamped on it, or as part of the logo. And I found this great decade resistance box that lets you select any resistance from 0.1 ohm to 10 megohms or something in 0.1 ohm steps, and that was pretty cool. Let's see. In case you're let's see, what are they famous for here? Here's a little bit of Latvian right there. It's the room service menu. You know how I know that? Because it says room service menu there. Latvia is famous for this liquor called black balsams. It tastes awful. It's really bad. You don't want it. Somebody gives it to you, just accept it graciously and tell them thank you very much. So there's the quick tour of Riga. I'll tell you a couple other things. There's a huge radio and TV tower here in Riga that was built actually during Soviet times. And it's this huge, if you ever seen the Stratosphere Hotel in Las Vegas and the big tower they have there with 3 sides, well, that's kind of what the base of this looks like, except it's a lot bigger. And the base goes up, and then it goes up, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of feet, maybe close to 1,000 feet, and then the tower, the steel tower, begins after that. So a lot of the FM stations and the TV stations are all on that. And so I'll fill you in a couple more things. During Soviet times, when the Soviet Union was here, Riga was this center of technology. It was kind of like the Silicon Valley of Russia, and so here in Riga there was a lot of expertise, especially in telephony, telephone systems. So in Riga they built phone switches that were used all across Russia. They built telephones. At the University of Riga, they specialized in electronics and particularly in telephony. So they still specialize in that. There's a big research department at the University of Riga. And in fact, there's part of the university that hires themselves out to do special projects. And actually, the Telos Alliance hires them to do regression testing on our software. So that's kind of a big deal when you've got literally 2,000 features in your software and you add one, you want to make sure you didn't break 5 of them. And so not all of our products at Telos, but a number of our products, they do regression testing on those. And I'd had lunch today with a couple of guys from that department. And the other interesting thing, that even before Russian times here in Riga, it was famous for building, of all things, speakers and radios. And they built speakers here apparently because there is some kind of wood in the forest, and there's forests and forests here, that just really makes for nice speaker cabinets. So the industry grew up of building speaker cabinets and then winding speakers and putting cones on them and making speakers, and then that grew into building radios. So I think even before Soviet times, the Latvians were building speakers and radios, and then now telephony gear. So that's I guess that's the short story. I'm here because my employer Telos has an office here. We've got a half dozen guys writing code. They're working on things like voice over IP telephony for Telos. The people here are writing all the code for our audio consoles, and there's a few other projects that they're working on, and they're just amazing. They're extremely clever, smart guys. And one more thing. There's one of these testing labs, and on one of our previous shows of This Week in Radio Tech, we took a tour of this testing lab where they test electronic gear for its susceptibility or lack thereof to shock, to sparks and static. And then they also tested for emissions testing. So they see if when the gear is running, does it put out interference to other devices. So they do that here, and honestly, it costs less to get it done here than it does in the U.S. So not all of our stuff at Telos, but some of it's done here. Hey, Chris, you should bring some of your gear over here. I'm sure they'd be glad to test it for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would pass. They would definitely pass.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not saying what. Come out with a new design, and you get to come over here to Riga, where today the high temperature was 21 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, wow. Well, the high temperature here today was about 23 degrees Fahrenheit. So
Actually,
not too far off.
I was talking to Frank
tonight's
Foti.
about 16.
Yeah. Oh,
then I mentioned the 30-mile-an-hour gusts of wind that brought it down to -5.
We got the same weather. We got the same weather. Gosh. So anyway, that's the story. You ought to come here in the summertime. Riga is known also for how shall we say, wild stag parties. Apparently, people come from all over Europe to enjoy that kind of activity here in Riga. So Riga's famous for that too. All right, there's culture, opera, things like that. Great shopping. So cool place to be. I'm coming home tomorrow though. All right, we ought to get in the. That's enough of the travel log. Let's move along here. A couple things that are in the news. More automakers and more models of cars with HD radio were introed at the Detroit Auto Show. So that just went on. Chevy announced the all-new 2014 C7 Corvette Stingray, manufactured just up the road from Nashville in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It'll have HD radio. Infiniti, the Q50, will have HD radio as a standard feature. Jeep, their Grand Cherokee, the first Jeep to offer HD radio. Kia is going to offer the new 2014 Cadenza, which will be the first Kia vehicle with HD radio as a standard feature. And Lexus launching the 2014 IS, which is the first vehicle to hit the roads with HD radio audio and a subscription-free traffic and weather service as a standard feature. So 31 automakers now publicly have announced plans to incorporate HD radio in 160-plus models by the end of 2013, and with 80 models having HD radio as standard equipment. Mike, Phillips,
yes.
HD radio. What do you? I mean, is it finally gaining some traction with all this in new cars?
I don't. I mean, cars are where it's happening. Cars are going to drive the market because that's what drives the market. So, it kind of was an exciting thing to hit the market, and then it was slow being adopted, and then there were discussions as to whether it would really have much impact. But if the cars drive the market, then maybe it can have some impact. We're talking about audio and sound. I'm a little skeptical as to how much difference you can hear between HD audio in the car, which is not high definition, of course, HD audio in the car, digital audio versus analog audio. And I'm actually interested in hearing some A/B tests in a well-designed, well-engineered automotive sound system, because I've yet to be able to do that sort of an evaluation.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I'm sure you've heard plenty of HD radio there in the New York market. You've got plenty of it there. What speak to Mike's concern about quality. And by the way, I learned some years ago, I guess it was in a press release or a whisper or something from Ubiquity Digital, HD radio doesn't mean high def. It's just an H and a D. They don't stand for anything.
That's correct.
Chris? Yeah?
That's correct. That is correct. It's not high definition radio. It's just H and D. I'm not sure. Some marketing thing. HD radio or digital radio that's being out for broadcasters, it's bit reduced audio. So unless you properly process the audio for bit reduced compression, you probably will notice a difference between the analog and the digital, depending on the source material. It can sound pretty good, but right now I think most folks that are doing the IBOC, which is the in-band on-channel, meaning that the analog FM plus the digital carrier together, I think is 96 kilohertz is what the bandwidth is right now. So that's gonna give you some little squirrely sounds depending on how you do it. But it can sound pretty good. To Mike's question, is it going to be the equivalent of a CD playing in the car with a 5.1, not a 5.1, but a nice sound system going on? It may come close, but you gotta have to really tweak it and play with it. But it's much better than what you're hearing now on FM.
Well, I'll add my 2 cents. I listened to a number of HD stations when they first put it on the air. Probably on the order of 5, 6, maybe even 7 years ago or so, and heard a few stations that really did this right. If you just ran a single HD1, which would always be a copy of the analog signal, I heard some stations that I was really impressed with, actually. One of these being a hip hop station in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, I got to tell you, I'm not a hip hop fan at all. I turn the dial pretty quick when I hear it. Can't stand it, actually. And so I was reaching. I had an HD radio, an aftermarket one, in my car, and I tuned across K97. That's the hip hop station, and the usual analog. And I thought, it doesn't sound too good. Well, it blended over to, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with their sound. They good processing, good engineers there. It blended over to HD. Oh my gosh. The bass just got, instead of being whompy and mushy, the bass was just really clear. And the high end wasn't bad at all. They didn't have an HD2 or an HD3, so they were using all the bits available for their HD1. And I would punch back and forth then between analog and digital. And the overall, the digital sounded better. And it sounded better to the point where I thought, I'm not a fan of this music, but I could listen to this. It actually sounds good coming out of the radio. Well, and then I heard a few other stations in other markets, St. Louis and New York, Salt Lake City, Dallas. I heard HD in these markets back before people were really putting on HD2s, so you were hearing the full bit rate. And I got to say, many of them I was impressed with. A few, you could tell the engineers, the station weren't doing audio processing very well or correctly for an HD signal. But those who got it. I even heard an AM HD station in St. Louis that I won't bore you with the whole story, but my AM radio had flipped over to HD on this AM station. I was on the phone, and when I hung up my phone, because I wasn't paying attention to the radio, when I hung the phone up, my ears heard this audio coming out of the radio, and I thought I was listening to AM. It sounded, about the quality without a lengthy, evaluation. It sounded about the quality of a typical FM analog station. So it was pretty clean, and this particular station wasn't processing hard. They were just doing a nice job. So I guess my point there is HD can sound pretty good, and depending on a lot of factors, it might even sound better than the analog. Well, when stations want to offer more content, which is part of the benefit of HD radio, you add an HD2, maybe even HD3. Then you have to take these bits that you have and start dividing them up amongst other streams. So with that in mind, Chris, in New York City, I guess aren't most of the FM stations there doing HD2s as well as an HD1, and therefore they're splitting their bits up between two?
Absolutely. Yes. HD2 and HD3. Most of the stations here in town are doing that. A lot of stations are, because they're looking to generate revenue or trying to find a way to generate revenue. So yeah, it's a challenge. The HD carrier, basically it's a streaming signal. The HD is an actual stream, just like you would do, like we're doing right now, without video. And it's a type of, I won't say MP3, but it's a type of compressed audio. And if you process it properly and understand the principles, you can make it sound really good, even at the lower bit rate. The HD2 and 3 is going to be kind of tough because those bit rates are really low. But the primary HD1, which is the FM analog equivalent, you can make it sound pretty good. It takes some attention. And the problem is, I think still HD radio is still not getting the attention from a lot of broadcasters as it should.
But doesn't that speak to an industry issue, though? Because to get a radio station to sound great, you've got to have a good engineer. It's not just to call Kirk and buy a box and plug it in. You have to know where to turn the knobs. You have to know the modulation levels. You have to know what to listen for in terms of digital artifacts. And the reason I say that is because when I was coming along, the FCC was giving out FM radio stations to AM owners because they wanted to have something on the FM band. As FM in the 70s really came into its own in the smaller markets in the outlying areas and became the AM destroyer that it ultimately became, it was a challenge in the AM market to make the AM radio station sound as good as it could sound. So your competition for the AM signal was the FM signal. And that's where I spent an awful lot of time trying to learn out how to process a radio signal, which it sounds to me like we're full circle. We're back trying to take limited bandwidth and compete with wide bandwidth and maintain a sense of some sort of respectability there.
Absolutely. It is an industry issue, what you're speaking of. The problem has become So part of it has been our own fault, the engineers, the techies in the industry, for being antisocial to some degree. And also the industry itself has shifted away from the quality that it's expected, because now it's all about squeezing out the last possible dollar because of a shareholder needs, or whatever the case is. It's gotten ridiculous. But yes, you're absolutely right. When AM was king, FM came along. The bandwidth issue right there was plain and simple. That was an easy way to upset the apple cart. Now you've got analog FM, analog AM, and now you have HD. And you're coming full circle with, how do I do this HD in the limited bandwidth? How do I make it sound right or wrong? But there's not enough drive from the business side to do it right. It's just get it on. It sounds okay. It's good enough. That's what it comes down to. It's good enough. And part of the problem is, now that you have MP3 players that came on the market years and years ago with limited bit rate to begin with, 64, 128, that's pretty much become the sound that people are accustomed to. So if it sounds like their iPod or their Diamond Rio, to go back in time, or an MP3 player, anything, that's what people are using as a reference. What's that?
Their cassette tape deck.
The cassette tape deck, even in worst cases.
In some cases, I'm thinking about some of the audio streams I'm hearing on the satellite stations, and it's just horrible. I mean, they have.
Well, the satellite stations, the problem you're going to have there, and I've talked to some folks over the years, the reason you have the horrible audio the way it is really because they're just trying to squeeze as much bits into the bucket they can to make as much money possible with the subscriptions. The more channels, the more offerings, or as people like to say, services, they can charge. But that's what that is. That's what you're hearing. And they're all, and it's statistical multiplexing. It's bandwidth comes and goes as needed. If you watch DirecTV or Dish Network, watch a sporting event, and then watch a drama channel, and you'll notice the difference in quality there. The video, where are the bits going to make the best, and where's the money coming in from? Is it
Andrew says Howard Stern's getting them.
Yeah, well, you know what? Howard does very well for what he has, and he's he's no idiot. He understands very well what has to be done and done right, and he's benefiting from it. There are a few other people that do the same, but that's what you're up against. And to Mike's point, people need to understand the finer art or the finer points of audio processing, whether it be audio, video, webcams, the stuff we're doing right now. You can go from nice quality video and audio to something barely visible and very, very audible, and people still accept it as, that's good enough. They accept it. It's like, well, that's okay. So the industry,
if you guys remember back when satellite radio was first proposed, and I remember I think it was back in the mid '80s, as I was reading articles about proposals from one company and then a competing company to put satellites in the sky, and they had different ways of doing it. And that's what we have now. We have one company has geostationary satellites, and the other company has these elliptical satellites that stay over the U.S. for hours at a time. And then spin around the other side of the world. But the proposal, I recall the number 60 as being the number of channels that each of these two companies was proposing to transmit. And then, now, of course, audio bit rate reduction technology, I'm sure, was much worse than it became. And so they ended up putting more and more and more channels in. Aren't we? Isn't each company, Sirius and XM, okay, same company now, I suppose, but aren't they up to about 200 channels each?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, one uses, I think, the pack algorithm type thing, and then what's the other ones use again? They use the form of, what is it, the AAC, something like that. But they're crunching it down because you can tell which channels they're putting the bits to, and the other channels that are sort of getting squeezed out.
Yeah, and with at least one of the companies, the algorithm they're using is a big secret. But the point is, you can listen to some channels and they actually kind of sound okay, and other channels, they don't sound very good. Why? Because what you said about statistical multiplexing and how many bits they allocate for different services. If it's got a low number of listeners and audio quality may not be a premium thing for that channel, it's perceived not to be a premium thing, then we're going to give it a lot fewer bits, and it's going to sound kind of yucky. I gotta say though, I believe that the quality of the satellite receivers has improved, at least from my perspective. The only time I get to listen to satellite radio, I could quit being a cheap guy, and go subscribe to satellite. But I get in a rental car, and a few years ago I got in a rental car, and I swear every channel was just dreadful. Now I don't think the radio was malfunctioning. I think the radio was working right. AM and FM stations sounded okay. But all the satellite channels just sounded dreadful. And I just rented a car, it's about a year ago, actually here in Cleveland. It had it had satellite radio in it, and I was tuning different channels. And you know what? No, they weren't perfect. No, yes, if you're used to listening for it, you can certainly hear artifacts, but they weren't irritating. Now, did my own perception of quality go down? I don't think so. I mean, I think, well, we'll get into that later, but my point is that I think the radios are actually getting better. They're figuring out how to decode the algorithms better and make sure that the sound comes out the speakers better. Thought about that? Yeah.
Oh, actually, the RF section, the front end of the radios, has been improved immensely.
Oh,
that's been the other problem.
So
you got to remember in digital,
about,
it's bit error rate.
Yeah, you got a high bit error rate. You're sure you're going to get worse quality. You're right. So we're talking about audio quality, and that's what we intended to talk about here on the podcast. So I guess we ought to get to it. Mike Phillips, our guest with us here, has a lot of experience with studios. Back as he was describing back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and longer. Working at his family's radio station, and since then, certainly doing a lot of studio work. You're in a studio right now, Mike. And I guess when we talk about audio quality, have you ever noticed that a lot of radio stations are fairly similar in quality? There aren't too many that are just horrible. But think about podcasters. There's somebody I heard last week. There were 250,000 different podcasts available now around the world. Not episodes, but actual podcasts with multi-episodes. Sure, some of them hang around for 3 episodes and go away. Yeah,
three or less.
So many of these podcasts are just absolutely dreadful. You'd have to work so hard just to put up with listening to it. Now, maybe I'm an audio snob. Okay, I am an audio snob, but that's why I like listening to the professional podcasts, because they actually do sound good. They're enjoyable to listen to, and they may or may not have better content. I say they probably do. So. Let's start at the beginning, Mike, and hear your comments about where things start. I guess typically at the microphone. So let's start at the microphone and maybe the talent's relationship with the microphone.
Before I address that, Kirk, I do, because this is a very, very big passion of mine right now, the broadcasting side of things. And I spend a lot of time each week answering questions from people. I participate in a lot of the Google Plus communities. There's several there on the podcasting topic, internet broadcasting topic. GFQ has a community there. And I answer a lot of questions, and I've started writing some blog posts to help people to get their audio just right. Invariably, I don't know why it is, and I know that you guys are going to relate to this as soon as I say it, but starting with the microphone, the first thing that'll happen is somebody will say, why doesn't my microphone sound right? What's wrong with it? It sounds such and such. All right, what you need to do is tell me what you are using as far as your audio chain is concerned. Invariably, they're going to have an equalizer, gate, limiter, compressor, mic, processor, denoiser, all sorts of garbage in the program chain. And I said, if you want me to help you, you're going to have to let me be a little radical here. And they say, all right, go ahead. I said, take all that crap out. Just disconnect it all. Plug your microphone straight into the mixer, and then out of the mixer, I want you to go into your recorder or the CDN or whatever you're doing. Let's, like that great philosopher Paul McCartney said one time when he was asked how the Beatles did such complicated music. He said they took a complicated idea, they simplify it, and then they complicate it. And I think that's probably the right idea for audio and audio processing as well. This goes back to something that Bob Raymont and taught me back in the 70s, and Mike Durow reaffirmed it, which is that you start at the microphone. You literally start at the connector plugged into the microphone, and you follow your chain all the way through from start to finish. No chain is stronger than the weakest link. If there is anything at all in the chain that's broken, you fix that before you start trying to optimize your system. You can't optimize a broken system. I think I would add to that a lot depends on the microphone that you use. Having said that, the podcasting situation, internet broadcasting situation, is a little different than the typical broadcasting situation, particularly when it comes to major markets. Internet broadcasters and podcasters are typically like I'm doing, originating their shows from their home. The home is not necessarily the most acoustically perfect environment that you can get. I mean, that's being facetious. It's usually horrible. There are air conditioners, dogs, all sorts of nonsense going on that make the environment not the perfect one for a broadcasting environment. And what happens is that if you're in the recording industry or know about that industry, then you know the love for condenser microphones. I mean, how many U87s are there in the world? How many Neumann U47s are there? KM184s, and on and on and on and on and on. But if you use a condenser microphone for podcasting or internet broadcasting, you're going to hear all those fans. You're going to hear the dogs. You're going to hear the air conditioner running.
You are so right.
The microphone, I mean, that microphone is doing what it's supposed to do. It's picking up everything. They are very, very sensitive mics.
And
so the consensus.
I'm thinking
I'm sorry.
There really aren't any. Maybe not aren't any is the wrong thing to say, but it's hard to find a condenser mic that's particularly directional. And if you're in an environment that's not perfect, then you really want a highly directional microphone, don't you?
Yes, and I think you want one that's not as sensitive as most condenser microphones, because they typically have extended high-frequency response, and it's a different element. It's a different sound. I was a little suspect the first time I heard the comparison, and I did it myself, and I immediately became a believer. Now, having said that, if all things being equal, you need a dynamic microphone for your studio, I recommend either one of two microphones. Number one is the one you're using, which is the Heil PR40. Absolutely fantastic, fabulous piece of equipment invented by a genius who really knows his stuff, Bob Heil. There's nothing better, in my opinion, than a Heil PR40. Not everyone has $325 for a Heil PR40, or if there are so many beginners getting into the business like there are now, then maybe they don't want to risk that kind of money to find out if they're going to stick to it. So what they should do then is get another microphone, one of which I'm using right here, which is an Audio-Technica AT2005 USB. Now, that microphone is exactly the same microphone as the Audio-Technica ATR2100. I don't know how many of these things that I have quote-unquote sold. I don't sell them. I ask people to buy them and recommend them. They're everywhere. $39 a piece.
What?
$39 a piece. They are
$39. Gee, Manny, I had no idea that Audio-Technica made a USB mic for $39.
I'm just telling you, and it's and on top of it being $39, it's XLR and USB. You can use it either one or both at the same time. For the beginning podcaster, they can use the USB cable to get started, and they say, wait a minute, I need a mixer. I need to be able to play music. They can then take the XLR cable, plug it into the mic, into the mixer, and they don't have to throw the mic out and go buy a new one because they've upgraded.
Wow. So say the name of that again. So it's an Audio-Technica, what?
It's one of two. It's either an ATR2100 or an AT2005. The prices do fluctuate on them. We've been buying them for as low as $39, and now their price is creeping up to, I think, about $50 on Amazon. But here's the beautiful part. I have zero hesitation recommending the microphone, because if you buy it and it's not exactly what you want, if you stick to the podcasting business, you're going to need a second mic or a utility mic or a remote mic or something one day. So even if you keep that mic and go buy the Heil PR40, you're still going to need a second mic at some point.
Right.
And for $39, how can you lose?
Yeah. You know, I know what you mean about there's a lure to getting a condenser mic. First of all, a lot of them have gotten pretty cheap. There's $100 condenser mics that claim to have a large diameter, a large diaphragm condenser with sputtered gold and fantastic specs, and they're made in China, and they're pretty inexpensive, and I don't know how they sound compared to a Neumann, but in a quiet environment, a lot of these things sound really good, but that's the quiet environment. I've got a friend who actually has a recording studio at his house. He's in South Carolina, and he really wants the sound of that Neumann U87. and he's got a very expensive mic preamp. He's got two of them actually you can choose from, and we just had to work so hard to try to deaden his recording studio. You can hear a dog fart in the yard with that Neumann microphone, and with like you said, with a dynamic mic like this one, if I get off axis very far, you can't hear me very much, and so that means
that's by design.
Yeah, it's not picking up noise from all over the room here. So good advice there. So microphone, and you mentioned two or three microphones. I've got this Heil mic. I've just been delighted with it. Now, Chris, you've got in front of you a really classic microphone that is a dynamic mic. Tell us about that one.
I have the Shure Brothers SM7. It's a popular studio microphone used by broadcasters and recording studios. It was popular for a lot of folks. A friend of mine who's a musician, drummer, used to put on his kick drum. He enjoyed the way it sounded. It's a dynamic microphone, so I don't know if you can see this. Maybe you can. Let's see if this works. Inside is the magnet, the coil, so it's not electric that is, and it's not a disc. And then there's a little bit of a space for pop filtering purposes. And this is the windscreen or pop filter. And it's basically a dynamic microphone, and it's somewhat directional. Has the ability to change the contours of the microphone itself. So in the back, you can, as Mike has mentioned earlier, you can boost the frequency response of the microphone, or you can set it flat, which means it would be two flat straight lines, or you can roll off the low end if it's too much for room noise, whatever you have. So that's with the SM7, and it has a nice sound. It can be a very, very warm sound, and it's got a very minimal proximity effect, which is that boominess you get when you speak very closely to a directional microphone. PR40 is very nice. It doesn't have that. It's not as pronounced, but that's the microphone. And for podcast folks, I mean, I've recommended some folks stick with dynamic mics to get started with, and it's safer. Like Kirk, you pointed out, if you're going to use a condenser microphone, you best have a very quiet, really dead room to work in, or studio.
I would dare to say, if you want to use a condenser microphone, you probably can't afford the room that you need.
That's correct.
Amen, brother.
Yeah,
totally agree.
And to Mike's point earlier with the sound, recommending microphones and whether it's a good or bad, or wow, I just spent say $40 on a microphone, I don't like the way it sounds. Bear in mind that everyone's voice can alter the way the quality of the microphone sounds. As Andrew, who's working the controls back at GFQ headquarters, knows, when he and I were doing some measurements with microphones, my voice compared to his voice in the same microphone did not sound the same. And yet, it's a very good quality microphone. It sounded fine for him, but with me, and we had a little mic processing to sort of keep things in check, we're like, wow, it's very different. Same is true with the microphone I'm talking on right now, the SM7. Same, I'm sure, is true with the Audio-Technica. I know from personal experience working in other industries that I did discover that a lot of folks, some microphones work great, say, with 7 people, and then the 8th person, the same microphone, just didn't cut it. So, expect there to be slight variations. Not a bad thing, but just understand that.
In fact, of course, we're not typically a recording studio, but if you go, I've been to some Nashville recording studios, and they have a whole closet full of microphones, and Faith Hill is in there recording a song, and they'll try one mic and another until they get the sound that the producer is looking for. So, yeah, they do sound different. Mike mentioned this Heil PR40. I like this mic because I think it makes me sound good. I've got the Electro Voice RE27, and for the first year or so of these podcasts, I used a Violet microphone, and I like it, but it's a condenser microphone, so it did pick up other noise in the room, but it was very accurate, and I enjoyed it. I think this one sounds better than the Electro Voice RE27 if you just do an A/B comparison with them, but a lot of guys think that the Heil PR40 makes a male voice sound good. But I can tell you, Mike, on your $39 microphone, you sound great too. So mic placement. Oh, by the way, a lot of folks think that this Heil microphone looks almost as if it is a condenser mic with the condenser on this plane, in which case you would talk across it this way properly. You would side address it. But the Heil always warns you, nope, that's not how this mic works. It's called an end address. So you address it this way. You talk into this end of it, and these grills here are all part of the system that keeps that makes it directional. It only picks up in this direction.
The case of the PR40 looks almost identical to the case on the Audio-Technica AT2020 condenser microphone. If you put the two side by side, you would think that they were different versions of the same microphone. One is a side address, the other is in-fire. And it's like you said, whenever they ship the PR40, there is even a little band that's wrapped around the microphone that says, this is an in-fire microphone. Talk into the end
talk
of it, not
talk
to the
here.
side.
That's right. That's right. Well, so the mics, and I'm glad you kept this simple, Mike, by just giving us 2 or 3 different microphones that you think a budding home studio owner, podcaster, whatever the case may be, should get. Now, if you're miking instruments, if you're doing home audio recording of things other than voice, then I'm sure there are other mics that you should check out. We're talking primarily about what we know to do, and that is the human spoken word, and that's in the form of a podcast or something like that. So, Mike, you started to mention earlier about the connector and the cable here. What should we know about making sure we don't screw that up?
These are my opinions, obviously, based on the years of experience, and I think that everyone who is involved with mixers, microphones, and cables and connectors ought to, before the night is over, go on Amazon.com and order a can of this Deoxit D5 contact conditioner. I've been using this stuff since its predecessor, which was Cramelin R5. And since this is a radio show, primarily I'll tell you how I became a fan of this stuff years and years and years ago. Do you remember the old McMartin B803 audio consoles?
Yeah.
Those boat anchors? Yeah. Well, the power supply regulators were actually on plug-in cards. They had these Molex edge connector cards. So the regulator for the power supply, it just was insane the way they did it. You plug the regulator in. Well, they had, instead of having gold-plated fingers on the cards, they had soldered them, which means that they are horrible, horrible connections. So we had this console, which we didn't have enough money to buy a lot of new stuff. And when I bought this console, I was disappointed that we kept having this low-frequency hum in the monitor amplifier. As an acid test, when I found this contact conditioner, I took the card out one night after we went off the air. I took a pencil eraser and very lightly cleaned it off, then took this stuff, the predecessor, I sprayed it on there, wiped it off, sprayed it on there, wiped it off, plugged the regulator card back in, turned on the console, and at least half the noise was gone.
Yeah.
And what's so bizarre about it is the next day, 100% of it was gone, and it never came back. And it was at that point that I became a believer. I'm an absolute crusader for this stuff. It's expensive.
So do you use it on XLR mic contact? You use it on anything where you have 2 pieces of metal that are supposed to talk to each other?
Absolutely, unequivocally, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I have now, like you've talked about before on the show, to be a broadcast engineer now, you better be a good IT guy too. I had a situation with a computer, which I repair a lot of those. I had a situation where I took the memory sticks out of it, had 4 memory sticks in it. I took them out to see what they were, put them back in. The computer wouldn't boot. It was having a memory error. It looked like memory had failed on it. So knowing that it had to be what I just touched, I took all 4 memory sticks out, put this stuff, once it sprays, once you can see the spray hit the contact, you've already put too much. You have to wipe it off. You cannot put the amount you need to put on there. You always put too much. So I put this little tiny spray of it on these contacts, wiped them down really well, found some green stuff on the Kleenex I was using or the Q-tip or whatever it was, did it on all 4 memory sticks, plugged them back in. Not only did they go into the sockets easier, but the problem was immediately solved. And I have done that a number of times. So I do think that, and by the way, there's a lot of discussion when we talk about mixers that podcasters use. They can't all afford the quality equipment like Kirk has. They have to go with things like the Behringers, the Mackeys, the Presonus mixers. They're all good stuff. But a lot of them, or at least some of them, use tin-plated connectors instead of nickel-plated connectors. That's a kiss of death for a quality installationist to use tin-plated Radio Shack type plugs and connectors. If that's what you have, you really need to be putting just a dab of these on there. It will get you the most life out of them that you can possibly get. So that's all I'll say about that.
I'll second that, and I can think of two pieces of equipment that, as a broadcast engineer, I totally fixed just using. It was Cramelin at the time, now Deoxit. One of them was a Nautel transmitter. It was their Amfet 1, which was an older Nautel transmitter, and the power modules plugged in with these huge connectors that I believe are called Cinch Jones connectors. Some people just call them Jones connectors. And they had a big metal tab that would connect into the female socket with a couple of contacts on it. And this transmitter just had all kinds of problems related to the seating of those Cinch Jones connectors. So one night I'd had enough of trying to track down the intermittent problems, turned the transmitter off, pulled them all out, and used Cramelin on them. I've also felt like they weren't seated hard enough. And these were RF connections in these things and lots of DC current. So I looked in the connector to see, okay, if I bent the tab like just 5 degrees in this direction, it'll push tighter against the metal receptors that are in the slot. And so I went through and every single one of them, I took long nose pliers and I bent them all just a little tiny bit. Plugged them in. Yes, they were a little harder to plug in. Never had another problem out of that transmitter, at least not related to those connectors. And the other one was, one radio station I took care of had one of these MCI reel-to-reel machines. Do you remember those MCI reel-to-reel machines, Chris?
Those are dogs. Yeah, I had a couple of those.
But I had to fix them. And they had a million Molex connectors holding boards together. And I thought, I'm not even going to begin to try to troubleshoot what's wrong with this machine. I'm going to take it apart and clean it first. I took it apart, got all the dust bunnies out of it, and then I saw these Molex, and I thought, oh, these are going to be trouble, man. And these aren't gold plated. They could well have been tin. And so I just took Cramelin, just dropped a little bit in there and swabbed it around and wiped off what I could, put it all back together. Worked perfectly. Didn't have to touch a thing. It's just they thought I was just a genius. Thank you, Cramelin. Now Deoxit. Okay, so we keep the connections nice and clean. Then what? How do we preamp the microphone so it sounds good, Mike?
I mean, when we talk about recording studios, I mean, and voiceover guys, they live, eat, and breathe microphone preamps, and they will trade in or sell a $1,500 mic preamp for $1,000 so they can buy another one that's $2,000. I mean, there's just so much trading and swapping and going on. And I will say this, maybe it's a controversial statement, but it's firmly my opinion. I do not believe that through an internet broadcast, it is my opinion that no one would be able to hear the difference between a Mackie preamp built into a mixer and the most expensive preamp out there, whether it's a Manley, Voxbox, or whatever it is. When you're talking simply preamplifier, I don't think the medium is high enough quality to reproduce the differences. Now, that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
I would agree.
Having said that, my favorite box, I mean, Chris is using a Symmetrix 528E voice processor. Andrew and I use the DBX 286S mic processor. It has a built-in mic preamp that I'm using, feeding it primarily for the gate because Bob Orban designed the gate in the 286. It is without a doubt the best gate I have ever heard on a piece of equipment, and I normally don't like gates. The mic preamp is good. The gating is good. I come out of the line output of the 286 and go into the line input on the PreSonus mixer over here, balanced, and it works great. But as far as preamps are concerned, particularly for the beginning broadcaster, use the preamp built into your mixer. If something's not right, you obviously could have a defective unit, but don't look there first. Look for everything else first.
How does one set the gain on the mic preamp? Let's say it's built into the console. You've got a big gain control, a trim at the top of your fader channel, And then you've got, of course, your regular fader that goes up and down. Do you have a method by which you set that trim so everything's at the right level?
I have the one that I like, and I recommend it, and it actually is for everything on the mixer, not just the microphone. And that is that the first thing you do on the first time you use the mixer is you set the master gain to what we call unity or the zero or the landing place, which is about 3/4 of the way up on the fader. If you're using a rotary control mixer, maybe it's what, 2 o'clock? Is that a nominal position?
Yeah,
That's
so.
typical, yes.
All right. So I recommend setting the master at that position. Then you go to your mic channel, set it at that very same position, which is the zero or unity position. That's
right.
with the trim or gain at the top turned all the way off. Then you set your gain with that trim control. That gives you that keeps you from overloading the interstages of the preamp, the summing bus, and so forth. With that setup, you're not going to have an overload problem. And it's really interesting, and I don't get this. I really don't. But I have a couple of people, and I hope they're not listening because they mean well, but they cannot, for some reason, convince themselves to run the master gain control over about 10 or 20%. And there are issues that arise, particularly in these low-cost mixing boards. Whenever you do that, you overload the summing amplifier, the summing bus, the Mackie 1402. If you set that mixer for normal speaking voice is 0 dB on the meter, and then you pan left or right with the pan control, which gives you a 6 dB boost on either side of center, you will actually clip not the preamp, but the summing amp inside the Mackie mixer if you go over 0 dB.
You know, you bring up a good point. A lot of folks don't realize that there are various stages in a mixing board, and the only way to get the best sound from the whole board is to run each stage at its designed comfortable level, at its optimal level. You don't want to run something at one place too low just to have to boost it somewhere else. You'll bring up the hiss. And you don't want to have an output turned down really low and have to make up for that earlier in the console, like you were just saying, Mike, and stand the chance of overloading, like what you said, one of the mix bus amplifiers, which are pretty sensitive little devices. So, yeah, the console is designed to run with the, as you said, with the master control and the each channel fader control at its home or zero or unity gain position, and then you want to bring in your sources and adjust that trim such that they're each putting the right amount of audio in. Now, a lot of consoles, these Mackies and others, have a clip LED somewhere up there near the top of the channel. Should that ever light up?
No.
If you ever see that clip lighting, turn the mixer off and go get another hobby.
Okay.
I mean, that's extreme. This thing is about to blow smoke if that clip light is coming on.
Okay. So you're talking too loud, or the trim's turned up too high. Yeah.
It's not set up correctly. You've got a lot of problems because that clip light, I mean, that's part of the transition, I think, that we three went through from the analog to the digital transition, because back in the old analog days, when the old VU meter on the mixer and you're sitting there in 0 dB, nobody ever hit 0 dB. It always was at +1, +2 into the red. I mean, everything was calibrated that way. You wanted to get as much meter movement as you could on everything that was going out over the air. But then the world changed, and whenever there are different calibrations of meters, which is sort of what got Mike DeRoe in the loudness meter business, because what we were seeing wasn't what we were getting. And what I'm getting to is that now with the meter, if you go, or you won't go, but if you try to go above 0 dB full scale, which is absolute maximum in a digital signal, it's nothing but clipping. And digital clipping, digital distortion is the worst sounding distortion I have ever heard.
It also stresses the power supply in the mixer.
So stay away from clipping, and you have to learn the meters. And these mixers, these cheaper ones, one of the things whenever you look at one of the Axia consoles, one of the things that stands out as soon as you see it is the beautiful metering on the deck, because The metering is designed by professionals for professional applications. You can, without even really staring at it, you can see exactly what you're doing, what you're sending through that console. I never really had an appreciation for how important that was until I started using these consumer mixers with maybe 4 LEDs, 5 LEDs for metering, and even the PreSonus, which does not have the best metering on it. And even when it does, it's usually just a bar that's out of the way and probably not really well calibrated. We do a weekly show, too, called Computers 2K Now, and Amnon, the main studio, like the counterpart to Andrew's studio, is at Amnon's house. And he has the mixer over to the side, and I said, something's wrong here. What are we going to do? So I actually found a very inexpensive, very wide, I think it's like a 13-inch wide dual LED meter made by American Audio. I think it's like $85 or something. It's not calibrated. The ballistics on it aren't good, but if you're looking for a sweet spot for your signal going out over the air, you can find it. He mounted it over the monitor. I'm looking at a monitor now as I look at the webcam. If I were in Amnon Studio, that LED VU meter would be about 4 inches above where I'm looking, and he doesn't even have to look at it to know if his audio is too low or if he's peaking. And it works extremely well.
Guys, we are talking about getting good audio from your home studio, your podcasting studio, or maybe you record commercials, maybe you do voiceover work at home, maybe you want to do voiceover work. Well, Mike Phillips is our guest on This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, along with Chris Tobin, who's in the 1010 Win studio in New York City. It's time to talk about the guys that make this podcast possible financially, and that's my employer and our sponsor, which is the Telos Alliance, and specifically the Axia Audio division of Telos. Axia didn't exist 10 years ago, and it exists now. In fact, there's nearly 4,000 Axia audio consoles on the air at radio stations around the world, in almost every continent. I guess none in Antarctica, but everywhere else there are Axia consoles. Hey, you're hearing this podcast right now through an Axia console. Well, what makes these consoles different? Why are engineers and broadcasters excited about them, and why do they put them in and then buy more and more? Well, it's the technology. It's completely different than anything that's ever existed before. We had analog consoles for years and years, first tube type, and then we had solid state consoles, and then we moved into the digital era with serial digital and AES-EBU digital audio going between devices and the consoles, and that worked okay, but that kind of digital AES-EBU was simply a digital replacement for analog. It still was kind of inconvenient in the same ways that analog often was. So the guys at Telos, Steve Church and some of his colleagues like Mike Dosh, and some of the engineers that they had working with him, like Greg Shea and Maciej Slapka, Gintz Linus, and some others, they had this idea of putting audio over a computer network, an IP network. Now, sure, you can do that, but there's some real problems you have to solve to make that really turn into a usable broadcast infrastructure, like having low latency, really low latencyy, so you can talk in the microphone and hear it in your headphones, and you don't hear any latency. You don't hear any delay. Well, that's what they worked out about 10 years ago. And now there's just a whole bevy of Axia consoles. Hey, Andrew's going to bring up, he did briefly, and I didn't talk about it, the Axia Element console. This was the first real modular console from Axia with a lot of different features and options. This is not an inexpensive console. This is not probably for most home podcasters. The Element can be anywhere from 2 faders to 40 faders. It has different modules that you can customize the look and the functionality of the console. You can put in ordinary faders. You can have a module that controls a Telos telephone system, a multi-line talk show system. There's a module available that is a production module. It gives you easy, quick, one knob access to EQ and panning. And you can actually run this console in a surround mode, so you can control the surround panning if you want to. There's also modules for buttons, switches that are user assignable. There's even a fairly new module that does intercom. It turns the microphone that's associated with that console into an intercom system, and you can talk over the Axia Livewire IP network to any other intercom station in the building, and there's even ways to put those off-site. So the Axia Element console, again, very modular. Typically, it's going to be anywhere from about $12,000 up to $25,000 or $28,000. And feature-wise, honestly, it competes with other consoles that in the past have been in the range of $30,000, $35,000, and $40,000 as far as the number of features that it has. So if you're a podcaster, you probably don't need an Axia Element console, although you're welcome to get one. We'd be happy to serve you. But if you're a broadcaster, especially a broadcaster with very particular needs, and you need to have a console that the talent runs accurately, they don't make mistakes on it, well, the Axia Element console is a great console to have. It's nearly indestructible. You can stand on the thing and jump up and down because it's built like a tank. Hey, if you want to know more about IP audio, I want to recommend this book to you. This book was written by my friend, the founder of Telos, the late Steve Church. And in fact, Steve lived for the last 10 years just a few blocks from where I'm sitting right now here in Riga, Latvia. He co-wrote this book with a guy named Skip Peasy. Skip has also been a guest on this show. It's available on Amazon and from other booksellers. It's not a cheap book. It's a college textbook quality book. I see Amazon has it now for about $59 for this book. But I got to tell you, in terms of education, Steve and Skip boiled down all the essentials of IP audio, plus a whole lot of nuances into this book, Audio over IP, Building Pro AOIP Systems with Livewire. So, hey, check it out, please, and you won't be disappointed if you spend $60 on that book. You will be well educated. Thanks for listening about the Livewire and Axia. If you want to check out more, you can get a lot of documentation online, white papers and brochures, on the web at axiaaudio.com. Just look for the knowledge button, and you can download plenty of information about Livewire and the whole Axia routing and audio mixing concept. axiaaudio.com. Thank you very much for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Hey, guys, let's continue. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I want to jump in here. Something you just commented on that just smacked me upside the head just within the last 30 days. And like you're saying, the Axia console, they're professional consoles that allow you they're easier to operate. You get a feel for them. You make fewer mistakes. I had no clue how important that was and how real that observation is until I began using what is a live sound recording mixer for broadcasting. And when it hit me is that at this moment, we have a guy I'm working with out of Florida who is doing a radio show. He is using the AT2005 microphone, USB, into his laptop computer at his home in Florida. He calls me on Skype, and I actually run the radio show from my home using this setup, and then I stream it over Mixlr to a radio station in Tennessee where he has a 2-hour weekly radio show. So for now, I'm back in the radio business. And I'm saying, what in the heck is going on here? Because I made more mistakes. I would slip up on some of the small things, and in the old days, never used to do that. And the decision I had reached was just a week ago that there is a feel to this professional equipment that makes you a better broadcaster. I'm convinced of it.
You know, that's Absolutely. Interesting that you say that. I think it's true too. That's one of the things that we discovered in ourselves at the company, playing with the consoles and imagining, okay, I'm a disc jockey, blah blah blah. Then we got this feedback from people who used it. The Axia Element console and the Radius console that Andrew there is using. There's a lot going on under the hood, so to speak. But the buttons that are brought out to the front panel are just the buttons that you need to get something done
in the right place.
So, in the right places, yeah, because, you know, a little sound reinforcement console, like a little Mackie or a Behringer, is going to have everything's brought out. Everything's right there, and you got a whole bunch of analog knobs on there, and it's easy to grab the wrong one and do the wrong thing. And the faders, they're all bunched up together really close, and they're kind of short throw faders. So, it's easy to make a mistake. Broadcasters, as opposed to someone with a home studio, broadcasters who need to use this thing 24 hours a day or 18 hours a day or even 12 hours, whatever it is, they need to execute a show without mistake. And so that's a big design philosophy with Axia. And honestly, it's a design philosophy with some other, pro broadcast consoles too. I'm not saying that Telos has Axia has a lock on the market there. It's a difference in what the console's designed to do and how we want to help you get that done. So, mic preamps, we talked a bit about those. I'll show you what I'm using, and usually this works really well for me. By the way, if you are hearing, you're listening to the podcast, and if you hear any anomalies in my voice, don't blame the mic. Don't blame me. Don't blame this mic preamp right here, because you're listening over Skype. I'm in Riga, Latvia. My voice is coming to you over Skype eventually. This little Shure X2U is a pretty amazing little mic preamp. It's mic XLR in on one side with a gain control, and then it's USB on the other side. And I've tried a number of different USB mic preamps, and there's some really crappy ones out there that just sound awful. This one seems to have a chipset that works really well. It seems to have good headroom. You can get too loud on it. It has some noise that's way down. But I've recorded plenty of voiceover work, not being on Skype, but just voiceover work into the computer with this thing, and it has worked just marvelously. So I can recommend that. There's probably less expensive things available on the market, especially the analog world, or just buy that Audio-Technica mic that's got USB built into it. So that's a good suggestion, I think. Hey, Chris, to get audio into your computer, when you're either where you are or at home, what are you using to convert audio into the PC's domain?
I'm using a USB mixer microphone preamp. I'll put this up in front of the camera. It's a Roland UA25EX. Has a built-in compressor limit if you choose to use it. It also has optical in and out. It does XLR in for the mic and tip ring sleeve. It's a combination XLR. It's very handy. I've been using it for several years. I use it both at home and on the road. I also have the Shure USB. I loaned it out to a friend. I have not received it back, so I'd recommend if you do buy one, don't loan them out. They don't come back because they really work well. But this one is working really well. This UA25EX, I've used it for a couple of years. The predecessor was the UA25. It works, and it's made of metal. So you actually, if you happen to drop it like I just did, it still will work and doesn't crack open on you. So it's really nice. But it's a good box, and it's stereo, so you have it left and right in.
What's the cost on that Roland?
This one, oh wow, I think it's under $100 now. I have to double check.
Really?
The prices kept coming down on it. Yeah. It's really handy. I mean, depending on if you're doing some kind of studio stuff more than just a podcast. You have a monitor switch. You have the mono switch. You can mono out your headphones if you have only one channel input working on it. You can also do a digital input, as I mentioned. It's got a really nice chipset, and it actually has it has phantom power, and it has a decent compressor limiter device in it, which I wouldn't, use it for peak audio. That's all it's for. But it's nice. A headphone out, and also has an RCA set of outputs as well. So you can actually have your headphones plugged in the front, and then the RCA line out can go to another device, say like your mixer or whatever. So it's pretty functional. It's very functional. And it has sample rate control, so you can actually select your sample rates from, I think, what is it, 96, 48, 44, 1. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And what else? Yeah, and the Phantom, by the way, is 48 volts too, not just some random voltage.
Hey, there's one more topic I'd like to cover real quickly, and let's see if Mike, if you can give some coaching on this. Since you worked in radio so many years, I'm sure you had, in a small market, you had fresh, green announcers, or announcers who had developed a bad habit. Maybe they came into your radio station, and they'd say, "Hey, how you doing? It's Kenny Rogers right there. Thank you. Good afternoon to you. We got the news coming up just a few minutes from now." What should people know about their own technique in talking into the microphone?
I think the most important thing is not to eat the microphone. It is not that the windscreen, the grill on it is not for your lips. It's not measured for your lips. In my opinion, the optimum distance to use a microphone is about 3 to 4 inches. If you have, and again, we're talking about typically rooms that are not acoustically very good. If if you have an acoustically treated, I was in a recording studio, which is beautiful acoustics once, and the guy, Ty Boyd of all people, was doing a voiceover, and he was a foot away from the U87. Sounded fabulous. We don't have that luxury in home studios. I think that you have to be as close as you can without popping the microphone. When you start popping it, you're too close. And there are other some tricks you can use, like kind of talking across it like I'm doing now. Don't talk into the side of it because your voice will disappear, and don't talk away from it because you'll pick up guttural sounds. There's a sweet spot. The example that I like to use for microphones like these directional mics is, notice how much it looks like a flashlight. If it were a flashlight, it would be shining the light directly into my mouth, directly across my lips. That's the sweet spot for picking up sound with this microphone, because it is a directional microphone. You have to play with it a little bit. If you get too far back, you pick up room noise. If you get too close, you'll pop the microphone. The great thing about it, there is that sweet spot where the proximity effect is optimum. It's the right balance. That's where the PR40 and the AT2005 ATR 2100, that's where they will give you as much fullness to your voice as you can get without it becoming too boomy.
That's good advice. That's good advice. It's interesting. I guess if you've been doing this long enough, I was thinking I can get pretty close to any microphone, but I'm really lowering my voice. I'm barely putting any breath out of my mouth, because if I were, I'd be popping the microphone. So a lot of that has how close you can get, or how far you can get, or how much you need to project has a lot to do with your own technique and your knowledge of using a microphone. But to be safe, yeah, there's about 4 inches away from the mic, and that's a good distance, and it probably sounds pretty natural. And it's still doing a good job of blocking out other room noise.
Well, I don't always wear headphones when I'm doing these things, because I have an internal mix minus set up on my speakers here, so that I can actually run the speakers. And a lot of talk shows do that with guests and so forth. They set up their 3-to-1 ratio with speakers to mic, so you really don't hear it that well. But even then, though, you still have to be careful because of room acoustics. If you get too far back or too close, it's not going to sound natural. But if you really want to learn to use the mic, my opinion has been, and you talk about these guys we had to train, I got to tell you, you have to be a glutton for punishment to want to train a small market guy. And some will listen, some will not, and I know you don't believe that. But the way, in my opinion, to train yourself is to wear good headphones, because as you wear headphones and listen, as you move around, all of a sudden something sounds different. It's not quite right. And you'll eventually train your ears to listen for a certain sound with these headphones on. I have no idea what made I have throat issues now I didn't have 25 years ago. But I can tell, I can close my eyes and tell you exactly where I am with this microphone, because I can hear it on the sweet spot. It's like tuning a transmitter whenever you hit the dip on the plates. I mean, there's a sweet spot, and every microphone has one, I guess, except maybe an omnidirectional.
Yeah. Oh, I know what you mean. What you just said, a sweet spot, that it's subconscious now. But I know that if I'm doing this, I can hear that I'm not in the right place. If I'm off mic, and I'm off mic over here, but in a different way. So yeah, that's a great analogy about, imagine the mic is a flashlight, and it's shooting out a beam of light that expands. Your mouth needs to be in that beam of light. That's a great analogy, at least for an end-fire microphone.
It needs to be lighting up your tonsils.
Chris, you've dealt with a lot of talent at various New York radio stations. What's the most common advice you have to give talent about working the mic?
I have told them, if they're prone to wearing headphones, which most of them do, I just tell them that talking to the microphone no more than, say, a comfortable 3 to 4 inches, and try to keep it in front of you, and that's about it. And just listen carefully. If you start to notice something sounds low, just simply come back to the microphone. Don't adjust the headphone level. Don't change the microphone level. Just come back to the microphone. And it's worked pretty well with most of the talk show folks I've worked with. News anchors I've worked with do it very well as in the same. If you want to really talk up close on a microphone, you got to get a Coles lip microphone. Coles lip mic. The ones from the BBC. Those
Yes,
use
I've
motor
heard of these.
racing events, and yes,
Aren't
I've
they
used
really
those.
odd looking?
Oh, they are odd looking, but boy,
And they're
I'll tell you,
expensive.
it'd be about $1,300, $1,500. Yes, I'm not saying for podcasting purposes, but if you want to really do lip miking and at a loud event, airport runway, that's the one to use.
Yeah, because it really will keep that noise out.
For advice for people on microphone, I just try to explain to them, if you just stay in front. If it sounds like you're getting off a little bit, come on back to the microphone. Don't adjust anything on the console. Because, I've had folks do that usual, let me just raise the mic a little more. My headphones got low. And all of a sudden, the microphone gain is there. Headphone gain.
Now, as an engineer, if you walk into the studio and you notice lipstick on the microphone, what should you do?
Hang around.
Well, the best you can
Hang
do
around
is
till she
just
comes back.
try and find out, who it is. Clean it off. Try to explain to them there's no need to get that close.
Do not spray cleaner on the microphone.
Windscreen.
Yeah, do not spray any cleaner.
Okay.
Just a damp cloth on the housing.
I saw a guy
drenched, soaked.
Or
I saw a guy in a church one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say I saw a guy in a church one time spray paint a microphone.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Grill and all.
Well, yeah. If you're going to use it for a prop and not use it as a mic, that might be okay. But if you want to use it as a mic, no, gee, oh my goodness. All right, well, guys, we've gone on for an hour and 15 minutes here, and I have enjoyed this. Just kept it simple, talking about microphones, mic technique, cabling, and mic preamps. But it's so for people who've been in the business for a long time, all this comes pretty naturally. We tend to get it right, but for people who are new in the business, not sure why you're not sounding right, this has been good advice. And Mike, I really appreciate your advice on which mics to buy, and which mic preamps to use and how to use them, and the cabling. You want to get some good cabling. Don't use a lamp cord from Walmart for a microphone. You can get something decent. I think this probably came from Guitar Center, and it probably cost all of $11 or $12 or so. Mike, actually, you answered one of my questions earlier in the show before I got a chance to ask it. I was going to ask you, what's the cheapest mic that a person should look at that's going to sound good? And again, it was this AT 2005 USB mic.
That's what this one is. And again, the ATR 2100 is a silver version of it. They are the same microphone. And you commented that you didn't know that Audio-Technica had anything that inexpensive. It's actually in their consumer line. And I don't know what happened. I bought the thing and tested it because it said USB. I had previously purchased another USB mic. It was horrible. I thought I'd try one more, and once I found out about it, I just started singing its praises. And what's peculiar about it, what I meant to say earlier, is that for some reason, Skype has a bandwidth. Skype has a frequency response. It has a response curve to it like anything else does that reproduces audio. And for some reason, Skype loves this microphone. It sounds better going through Skype than it does recording directly on the mixer.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, one more thing that just occurred to me. We've talked several times about these devices that convert mic to USB. They put out USB to go into your computer. And I guess the question would arise naturally, well, why not just use some kind of adapter cable and go into the microphone input on your computer? I think you guys know the answer. Chris, tell us why you don't want to use. Most computers have a mic input. It's a 3.5 millimeter, tip ring sleeve jack that you would plug into. On a desktop computer, and even on some laptops, it's got a red ring around it, and it's for the microphone. Why do you not want to use that, Chris?
Well, simple terms, the specifications designed by the computer industry for the audio input, the microphone input, were very scant as far as quality. The AC97 spec, which was what everybody's accustomed to, and then the newer, what they call HD audio specifications. Second, the mic input is, if it's on the motherboard of the laptop, which most likely it is, or the desktop, if it's integrated as well, is susceptible to the noises on the motherboard itself. Remember, you've got a huge noise generating device inside that computer. It's known as the CPU. So whether it's at 1 gig, 2 gigs, 2.5, it's generating noise, electronic noise. None of the audio circuits on any computer I've ever opened up are shielded or properly ground planed so that the noise is minimized or mitigated. So don't even bother. And also remember, an XLR connector, the 3-pin connector, is designed to be mechanically and electrically sound. Okay,
Yes.
sound both audible and mechanical integrity. A 3.5 millimeter ring connector is not meant to take stress. Stress meaning when you plug it into your laptop or even into the headphone jack and then have lateral movement up and down all around. Eventually those contacts break apart, and the integrated connectors they're not designed for that. So those are the real basic reasons, but the audio noise is just because it's not designed. The computers were never meant for that.
And there's an additional reason too.
Oh,
and that is most of those microphone jacks have a 5-volt bias voltage on them, and if you plug if you misfire the microphone and plug it in, you'll blow up the microphone. I destroyed an EV635A that you can run over with a tank, but I plugged it into the computer input jack with an XLR to 3.5 millimeter plug, and it zapped the element on the 635A.
And in some electronic hobbyist magazines, you can find the little circuit to whoop up that involves probably a transistor and a capacitor to run a dynamic mic into a computer input. But still, why would you? The mic input is just awful. You don't want to do that. Now, then the follow-up question is, okay, then why does USB work pretty well as long as you've got a decent quality mic or analog to USB adapter? What's so good about USB?
Well, the design of the circuitry that's taking the audio analog, converting it to digital, and passing it on. The USB portion is just zeros and ones. It's the conversion process, or what people would know it as analog to digital conversion.
Yeah.
And so they put the money and time and energy into that, and that's where it goes.
And I thought about that question. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
What I was going to say is that very question, and since you're in Latvia, you know that Blue is from Latvia, Baltic Latvia Universal Electronics, and this is their Icicle USB to XLR converter. And I would say the answer to your question is that computer motherboards are designed by computer designers who go grab a data sheet and throw audio on the motherboard. Whereas this Blue Icicle, the X2U, the Centronics MicPort Pro are designed by audio people who then find out how to convert that into digital electronics. So it's a completely different design philosophy.
And I maybe everybody knows, I was going to point out that, USB is a serial digital transfer protocol. And basically it's going to work perfectly or it's not going to work at all. There's not going to be degrees of, wiggle that USB. Maybe it'll come back and sound a little bit better. Well, you got some hum in your USB. Wiggle it or put some deoxide on it. No, it's going to work or it's not going to work. Now, if there's having a problem with it, maybe there's a problem with the driver. Maybe there's a mechanical issue with the USB and the digital's not making good connection. But there's no fiddling around with it. It doesn't depend on the same sorts of things that an analog audio signal would depend on. It's just got to be able to discern a 1 from a 0 at each receiving end, and the audio is going to be as perfect as the mic preamp and AD converter would make it. So I've had just great results with USB audio, and of course there's webcams that plug into USB as well, and that's a much higher data rate coming from a webcam than from some audio device. So that's why USB tends to work well. If you get it successfully into the USB format and get that in the computer, you're golden. The drivers and audio applications are going to use that probably exactly right. If you're using Audacity or Adobe Audition, you're going to get great audio through that USB. And if you're not getting great audio, you're going to want to check the mic to USB or the audio to USB converter. Guys, I guess we better go again this time. We've been at this for a while. I sure appreciate Mike Phillips being with us, our guest on This Week in Radio Tech, talking about some basics in getting yourself to sound good in your home studio. Also, in a awesome studio there in New York City, Chris Tobin at 1010 Wins. Chris, thanks for stopping in and joining us from 1010 Wins.
Oh, you're welcome. I just have to make sure I say thank you to Dave Plotkin, the Creative Services Director, who allowed me to use his studio this evening. So I've taken over. I have to restore the studio or reset it so that tomorrow morning you can produce commercials again. But yes, this is at the CBS radio facility here in New York City, and it's 1010 Winds AM. It's also online as well.
Cool. All right. Thanks for joining us. And Mike, hey, I didn't get to give you a chance to say goodbye. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, Kirk. It's a lot of fun.
All right. And on short notice, too. I appreciate it very much. And I was delighted when Andrew told me earlier today that you could join us. Andrew Zarian back at the studio on the controls. Yes, he's mixing the audio just right. So it's not too hot, not too low. It's just right. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you very much. And this episode of This Week in Radio Tech has been brought to you by Axia Audio and the Axia Element Audio Console. I would encourage you again to check out this book by Steve Church and Skip Peasy called Audio Over IP. It's available on Amazon. It ain't cheap, but it'll be a reference book for many, many years to come for you. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye, everybody.
That's all the bandwidth we can pilfer this week. Another twort has propagated, and all the transmitters and audio equipment live happily ever after, thanks to the handsome engineer and his kind, benevolent care. We'll be back next week.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
This Week in Radio Tech. Subscribe to iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Search for This Week in Radio Tech in the iTunes Store. Soliciting is strictly encouraged. If you liked today's show, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, we were never here. Kirk Harnack's wardrobe provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross Disaster Relief Services. Hair and makeup provided by Penelope Garcia Hernandez Weinberg.
He's unique, wouldn't you say?
I just want to get it over with.
This ends this transmission. Tango, Whiskey, India, Romeo, Tango. Signing off. Okay.